So it's been a while we're making all these videos, and we never really touch up on performance enhancing drugs. And I would really want to open up this video and dig into that. Why the hell we're not talking about it, but predominantly talking about what performance enhancing drugs actually do. And that might make sense to others why we are not going straight into that. So maybe let's unpack the science of the most common used performance enhancing drugs, and then explain, hey, this is why you are not jumping on that bandwagon straight away. Because more often than not, we reaching out to us and like, hey, by the way, what are we going to take? Or can I buy something? And to me, I look at them with like open kind of view. Yeah, we can get there, but is your body even healthy to start doing anything like that? More often than not, it isn't. And more often than not, what they are looking at and what they have been told to look at might not be sufficient, or it's just wrong metric to track. So I'll let you open up about what is the most commonly used performance enhancing drugs now that you come across, and where is the place for them to actually be involved in improving someone's health.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as performance enhancing drugs, there's going to be a ton of them these days. Like pretty much anybody on the planet can get some kind of a peptide, some kind of a SARM. You don't even really have to search very hard, and you can get it delivered right to your house. Those types of things, you've got to know what you're doing there. Let's touch on peptides, for example, right? Like some peptides, if you know what you're doing with them, extremely useful. If you don't know what you're doing with them, you're not going to really get anything out of it. Like as far as like there's like some growth hormone simulating peptides. Those can, some of them can drive appetite, some of them can drive some water retention, they can drive a little bit of IGF-1 and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, those are things that you can do pretty much to the same degree as some of those by some lifestyle changes. That's not really going to impact your health, or at least not taking it short term. But at the same time, if you're not doing, the basics of what we talked about, you're not really going to get much out of those, because peptides are very dependent on the environment that you introduce them into, right? And by environment, I mean, what is the internal environment of your body when you introduce peptides? They are much more sensitive.
I think the shorter kind of understanding, let me know if I'm getting it right, would be they are very time sensitive. And a lot of people don't have the luxury to time everything just to make this little thing work.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, think of it. Yeah, it's not plug and play. You have to actually know what you're doing. You have to have timing, right? For a competitor of some kind, they probably have that time, but that's not really our target audience. Our target audience are executives, normal people that are really busy, trying to make their money and trying to be healthy, and sometimes running into health issues, which brings me to my next point. SARMs are another thing that's very easily available. Those are detrimental to your health when it comes to liver if you are not operating correctly to begin with. Now, there's a subset of people.
It's a lot in blood tests that they cause way more damage than benefits if you don't know what you do with it.
Yeah, so especially, I mean, the reason why they're invented, right? The reason is for the androgen sensitive, right? So that's going to be children, that's going to be women. And so they're very selective, but at very small doses. Once you go to a bigger dose, which is what a male would require, you start getting other issues like liver issues and kidney issues and things of that nature, because you're taking too much, right? They are meant to be taking at very minute amounts so that they only elicit the androgenic response, the muscle building response, and very little of anything else. But the moment your dosage goes too high, now it starts affecting your liver and your kidneys. Every single guy that I know has no business taking a SARM. Now, if a female that's, needing extra muscle building ability and is just dipping their toe into that, this is probably one of the second tier things that I would start with, but it would be, amongst the first tier things would be things that are non-sex hormone based, right? Things like a little bit of metformin, a little bit of T4, things of that nature, right? Those do not
And I
have
think
any
it's
sex.
important to expand on that. It's not because they are female as such, but they're just smaller. So
Correct.
they
So now they
get away
get away
with
with
smaller dosage without harming themselves.
Correct. Yes. And that's why I just don't even go down that path of talking about them publicly in a positive light, because it really depends on the person. It really depends on what their current health is, because at the same token, if that female comes to me and she's displaying inflammatory markers, like her C-reactive protein is high and her EGFR is only like a 62, which is still adequate, right? It's still adequate on the test. But immediately I go, we probably better get these values better before introducing a stressor like a SARM, right? Or something along those lines. And then finally, you have your top tier class of PEDs, which are, legitimate hormones, sex hormones, testosterone, androlone, masteron, growth hormone. Though that's not a sex steroid, but it's a legitimate growth promoter. Those are all.
How does things like growth hormone and ipamorelin compare, for example?
Yeah, so one is a secretagogue, the ipamorelin, right? And so it's gonna induce your body to produce more growth hormone. And that can run its course as far as tiring out the internal mechanisms of your own body producing an exaggerated amount of growth hormone for short periods of time, right? That's totally fine. Think back when you're a teenager and you're growing really fast. But trying to use it as a primary growth promoter is not going to end up very well. Whereas growth hormone legitimately is the growth hormone, right? So again, I'm not saying that you have to be deficient to use these, but now it comes into lifestyle, right? Like, are you able, because it is much more user intensive, right? Like you're going to have to take at least once an injection a day or something close to that. Are you willing to do that, right? Do you have the time to do that? Things of that nature. And then you have like testosterone and other sex hormones. Yeah, they're clearly going to do that. And for the average Joe, right? Average executive that's just trying to be really fit, but kind of like what we were talking about earlier, they just don't have the time to really train and eat well and do all the right lifestyle things that we've been preaching here. Obviously, those, wherever we can get it, we try to get those, because that's going to hedge you or prepare you to be able to be okay when you take some testosterone and some growth hormone, or some of these drugs that might put slight downward pressure on your health. We're going to cultivate some health so that you can use it towards bringing up some of these deficient values because of your lifestyle, right? So we're using things like testosterone and growth hormone, HRT, to basically plug the holes that you're deficient in your lifestyle, so that you can still perform at your best physically and mentally, even though you are on the phone literally 24/7 trying to get business done, or on the computer 24/7 trying to get your business done. That is something that I'm running into more and more with the clientele that I have. Is they're just really busy people. They're just really busy people. And that's where those come in. But it's never right off the bat. We always start with some, just like we've preached always, we always start with some blood work to see, hey, are you even healthy enough to handle some of these things? And if not, that's what we've got to work on before we even go to the next step, right? And then
it's like taking a car to a race. Do you even have tires that are not flat?
Right.
So when you're looking on these things, you mentioned testosterone and growth hormone a lot. So I'm guessing these would be not safest, but probably most efficient things to add into someone's supplement stack, performance enhancing stack, and whatnot. So what do they actually do in terms of benefits, and what are the drawbacks of taking these things at exaggerated dosages?
Well, at exaggerated doses, that's where proper blood work comes in. At exaggerated doses, any of these things, and this is probably the best place to start, is they're going to drive red blood cell production. They're going to drive global anabolism everywhere, including.
And now you're talking about not growth hormone specifically, but more of a hormonal stuff.
Yeah, when you introduce growth hormone and testosterone, you're going to have an exponential anabolic signal all over the body. So not just your muscles are going to grow, nails will grow faster, hair will grow faster, red blood cell count will go up higher, right? And if you, yeah. And so if you came to me, like, and I literally had this experience not too long ago, if you came to me and we did some blood work and your red blood cell count is already really high and you're not taking anything, that's a red flag that we don't want to take anything yet. We want to figure out, why is your red blood cell count so damn high if you're not taking anything? That points to, some kind of a pseudo hypoxia, or maybe you have some kind of a genetic underlying disorder like, hemochromatosis or thalassemia, something. If you're not taking any drugs and your red blood cell count is through the roof and your hemoglobin's through the roof and your hematocrit's through the roof, or at least flagged, we want to know why. We want to know why, and we want to figure, because if you introduce a growth promoter like just simple testosterone, you're going to start running into issues. If you combine that with growth hormone and testosterone, well, you might run into more issues, right? So that is a crucial point. And people, that's kind of like the detriment of the drug culture, right? Like, we can reference literal, bodybuilders that are dropping dead from cardiac issues. Is it all the drugs? It's probably a combination of drugs and lifestyle, right? You're not going to blame it all on the drugs, but I can tell you they're not helping, right? They're not helping you do that. And so, yeah, when you come to me and we check your blood work, that's some of the stuff I'm looking at. Hey, where are your deficits? What's the red flags? Are those things that can be pushed upon or helped by some kind of PED therapy, if that's what you need, right? Because sometimes you don't need it, right? Like, I literally have a client that's 54 years old, goes outside quite a bit, and he's a real estate agent, so he does a lot of footwork, right? Like, he goes to houses all the time, and he runs a company, so he's always got a phone to his ear, but he's always outside. He's not in a cubicle. The guy's got a testosterone of 900, right? 900 nanograms. He doesn't need any testosterone, right? Like, not everybody, even though he's 54, right? Even though he's older.
Yeah,
does he need testosterone?
It's crazy good.
Yeah, so he just has a lifestyle that doesn't need intervention like that. But that's not everybody, right? And so when you start, those are the things that me and you do when we look at a client, we take them on. Do you even need it, right? If you don't need it, why bother? You're putting yourself at some kind of a risk, because it's never zero, at some kind of a risk for no reason, if you already have a decent lifestyle and blood work looks excellent. But
yeah, more often than not, people go through it just to mask some things that they can't handle. And it's like putting a patch on a scar that needs stitches. It's just not going to work. It's not going to hold up.
Exactly.
So how would you decide what are the benefits of growth hormone to begin with? And when would you go like, what, you would really benefit from this implication? Because I work with a lot of people who are getting prescribed ipamorelin and many other SARMs by their doctor. And I'm just sitting there and I'm scratching my head. I'm like, this is not going to work because you are insulin resistant. You have all these other things. Let's fix this before you even look at that. So what would be your train of thought of, hey, you know what? Growth hormone is available. This is what it does. So maybe explain what it actually does, because people think it just makes you huge and whatever. That's never the case. And how you would go about deciding, you know what? This would be something that would improve your quality of life.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's start with what it is. So growth hormone is essentially secreted by your body as a preparatory hormone. It prepares you for recovery. In general, some of that recovery can manifest as growth if you're in a surplus, right? But basically, that's what it's doing, is it's recovery globally, because growth hormone gets split into other growth factors depending on the damage, whether it's brain, nervous system, muscle tissue, tendons, ligaments, you name it, different growth factors for different systems. Growth hormone is broken down by your liver into whatever growth factors need to happen depending on your individual situation, right? So some people will reference as it's going to prepare your body to grow, or it's going to make it so that you satellite cell proliferation. Only if you're training really hard, right? Like, if you're not training really, really hard, it's not going to do much of that. It's going to do other things, other restorative things. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's there for restoring. The way it does that is by coaxing your liver to release glucose into the bloodstream, And then coincidentally, you're essentially going to kind of make it so that anytime that glucose comes into the bloodstream, insulin will come up a little bit. When that happens, that is a net anti-catabolic effect, right? So you're not losing muscle tissue or any other tissue. That's the first step that happens with growth, in short. And then later, the growth hormone makes it finally to the liver, and it gets broken down into all these growth factors. And so it's following the surge of calories or energy from the liver being released, and then goes to all the different places that it needs to recover, whether that's tendons, ligaments, muscle tissue, glial cells, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or glial-derived. It can recover anything depending on what kind of stress you've been in the day before. So that's what it does. Okay. If you're an executive, right, and you're literally have a million things going on in your head, and you're thinking about lots of complex problems, and you're always talking to a lot of people, you're working out, but you're not a bodybuilder or anything like that. Is it going to restore muscle tissue? Yeah, it'll restore the little bit of muscle tissue that you've damaged in your sessions, but it's going to do a lot more for recovering you from the little bit of sleep or poor sleep that you might be getting, because your brain is always in overdrive, right? So that's one of the main things that I like to kind of look at is, if you're somebody with a really busy schedule or things of that nature, can we introduce something like that will exponentially increase your recovery capabilities? So even if you're only sleeping 5 hours, it's like you slept longer, because your recovery system is a lot higher because of the growth hormone. Ipamorelin, for example, like I mentioned before, it only drives your own release of growth hormone. So you're hampered, right? And if you do it for too long, that's a net detriment, right? Because that's an integrated system. So you may the reason why your doctor may be prescribing you ipamorelin is because you might see that your IGF-1 score is really low on your test. So if that's the case, that tells me that the body did that for some kind of a reason, right? The body detected some kind of a long-term stress, right, that it couldn't recover from, and eventually it's not going to run down its own system. It's just going to dial it down, right? And so at that point, that's when we look at, what kind of stress are you dealing with? What's your inflammatory markers? What's your kidneys and liver looking like? And, if we have to change some things, that's the first thing. Like, most often, the thing that I change with this type of scenario is, okay, I understand that you are really busy and that you can only get 5 hours of sleep. You need the other 16 hours of the day to do your stuff. I'm like, can we shift it? Can we shift your sleeping to earlier in the day? So earlier in the evening, and you get up earlier, right? So you get up at 4 a.m. instead of trying to get up at 7 a.m. You shift the whole thing over, and we introduce some growth hormone and a couple things. It could be a little bit of cold exposure with the red light therapy in the evening, so that we can dial down and get some sleep earlier in the evening. You'll wake up earlier, you get more things done. You still slept 5 hours, but you were able to make those 5 hours more efficient with a little bit of growth hormone and doing it earlier in the night. And the reason for that is there's some studies out there that kind of elucidate that recovery in your brain happens much more the earlier the sleep cycle in the night. So versus staying up till 1 a.m., right? Mm-hmm. If you stay up till 1 a.m., you get less mental recovery, less brain-derived neurotrophic factor, less glial-derived neurotrophic factor, and about the same amount of physical recovery. So physically, you might feel fine, but mentally, you might be dragging. If we shift that, it tends to go the other way. And from all the other things that we talked about, insulin resistance is a big one. If you have any kind of insulin resistance, you have no business taking ipamorelin or growth hormone. Growth hormone, because of what I just stated, first thing the growth hormone does, even if you secrete it naturally, is it raises your glucose. If you have insulin resistance, that's not a great place to be if you're doing that, right? Like, so that tells me let's change something, which is another reason to try to shift your sleep. What happens at night when you're in front of screens and with a bunch of fake lighting on for 5 hours, because the sun went down at 8 p.m. and you're trying to stay up till 12 or 1 a.m., you're inducing insulin to rise anyway because of the blue light that you're interacting with. So instead, but that's not recovering you because you're not sleeping. You see what I'm saying? So instead, let's change that whole system to You go to bed around 9 or 10, you take a little bit of growth hormone, it does its recovery thing. You wake up early, right? 4 a.m. or whatever, and you shouldn't be insulin resistant at that moment because the growth hormone ran its course and you didn't eat during the night and you didn't interact with a lot of blue light because we got you to go to bed earlier. So overall, the insulin resistance equation gets lowered earlier in the evening. You wake up the next morning, you fast, you drink some black coffee or whatever. You know, I find that most people do really well when they get up early and they just drink a lot of water, right? Just drink a lot of water and get a lot of work done. And then when the sun's coming up, you take a little break, right? You call it your noon, right? Your midday break, but it's really, you know, the first light of day. You take a little break, you go outside, you get a workout in, you get your breakfast in, and then you have a whole another day to come, you know, a whole another half a day to come.
And this is probably the most important part why we don't talk much about performance enhancing drugs, because more often than not, you need to change your lifestyle habits for those drugs to actually be beneficial for you. Because if you don't change anything about your life, what you were just talking about, you know, going to bed earlier and getting out for walks and this and that, and just start adding drugs, you're just burning yourself down even quicker. And you're going to pay for it at the end. Correct.
Yeah. Even if you don't have insulin resistance, if your lifestyle is that I just described, you're always up till 1 a.m. Or even, you know, 11 p.m. It could even be that early. Taking a bunch of growth hormone, especially if you, again, if you're a bodybuilder or an athlete and you have an enormous amount of muscle mass, it's going to take, you have a long road before you become insulin resistant because you just have a bunch of it. Most of the people we're dealing with are not that. They're not that, right? But again, which goes back to everything that we've hampered before, which is know where your starting point is. So you know the things you can and cannot do. And this is elucidating some of those details.
And I think it's also important to add that you can be insulin resistant and not even that big. You
Absolutely.
know, I've worked with a lot of guys who are, they look leanish and whatever, but they are borderline diabetic. And they're like, okay, dude, we need to change a lot of things. And when you fix these things, add a little bit more movement here and there, add a bit of going outside because they don't go outside at all. Within a couple of weeks, they're like, I have suddenly so much energy. And like, yep, dude, let's stay away from drugs as long as we can. Let's get you healthy and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a perfect, and then, you know, going back to previous episodes, right? If that person happens to live somewhere where there's a clear winter, right, and summer, well, maybe growth hormone isn't a thing that we want to take that much in the winter, right? Because they're going to perpetually be indoors more, right? Maybe we just stick with just a basic testosterone replacement therapy and work on the things that we can work on. And then come springtime, now we start introducing some growth hormone because now that person's not going to be indoors nearly as much, right? So insulin resistance isn't even going to be a thing. In fact, if they have insulin resistance, springtime and summertime is when you want to fix it, right? That's the when because you just have more light to work with. So all of that has to be taken into consideration on what you do with you know what you're going to take, if you're going to take anything.
So this brings me down to asking you about metformin and things like that work on those things. I've had a lot of guys coming to me and they're already pre-diabetic and whatnot, but they don't look like it. And their doctor have prescribed them metformin and many other things. And I usually go like, what's your lifestyle like? And it's sitting at home all day. Like, okay, or office or those kind of things. So where does metformin come in play? What benefits does it give? What drawbacks there might be? And would it even be beneficial to try to stay on it for as long as possible? Or would you try to get them off it for as quick as possible? So what would be the train of thought? Because it's so popular now, how would you approach it?
Well, so there is a lot of evidence that it helps with longevity, that it helps with other things other than diabetes, right? Now, here's the thing that you'll find if you're getting it prescribed for diabetes. If you don't change your lifestyle or you don't attempt to really change what's going on to cause the prediabetes first, what ends up happening with the metformin dose is that it goes up, right? Like they start you at 500, a year later, you're at 1,000, a year after that, you're at 1,500, and then finally, year 4, you're at 2,000, and then by year 5, you're taking insulin plus metformin. That's the problem, right? Like, it's not the metformin doesn't do the things that it does. And basically what it does is it changes the GLUT4 translocator. And that's just fancy talk for making your cells more sensitive to insulin. That's what it does. Makes you more sensitive to insulin. So it starts to resolve insulin resistance.
So
the problem
just
is
a little bit more on that about what does it mean in terms of their ability to absorb food and deal with all those things.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even call it absorb food. So think of it this way: if you're insulin resistance, that means that your pancreas is secreting this much insulin, right, to handle this much glucose in your blood. As you become insulin resistant, to handle the same amount of glucose, you secrete more and more and more insulin. That's insulin resistance. When you introduce metformin, it allows the amount of insulin to come down a little bit so that the same amount of glucose can now be handled by a previous value of insulin. Eventually, it starts to also creep up again if you don't change what's causing the insulin to rise, right? That could be a lifestyle thing that we just described. And that's honestly one of the biggest, right? Being indoors is a recipe for raising insulin chronically, right? So eventually, even 500 milligrams of metformin, your insulin still starts to come up, then your doctor bumps up the dose, okay? And that's what it's doing. Now, in the background, right, that's not the only thing that it does. When you're insulin sensitive, it also means that cells are working better, right? Like that's the whole point of being insulin sensitive, is that things are running more smoothly. So it has an anti-aging effect if you can maintain that insulin sensitivity. So if you don't change some of the background things that might be causing your insulin resistance, no amount of metformin is really beneficial. Right.
What would be your top 3 strategies to increase insulin sensitivity?
Number one, when you eat, try to pair that with some kind of movement, right? And Stan Efferding has made this very popular, right? The 10-minute walk. That's a great strategy. That's a great strategy. Some people don't have that capabilities, right? So if you do have that capability, that's a very easy hanging fruit of when you eat, go for a walk. It's not really too much more to do about that. The other strategies, right? Some people physically can't do that. For example, nurses, people that work in hospitals, things of that. They're not going to be able to eat and go for a walk, right? In fact, they might not even be able to eat.
They won't be able to eat because they
right. Yeah, but somehow that's actually one of the fields where I see the most insulin resistance. Why? Because they're under extremely bright lights all the time, right? So simple strategy: dress with sleeves all the way up to your neck, dress, because there's often a dress code of like what color of scrubs you can wear, but you can always updress, right? Less skin involved. And, people might think that's a little bit weird about skin. I'm like, well, no, because melanopsin, right? We talked about this in our eye module, our eye podcast. Melanopsin is located in the skin and it interacts with blue light to raise insulin and destroy DHA. Melanopsin is also in your skin. Insulin resistance can go up, even in a blind person that doesn't have eyes, because they still have skin. Okay. So less skin involved with interacting with the artificial light. That's a low-hanging fruit that you can do whenever you're indoors. If possible, right, nurses might not be able to get away with this, but if possible, some blue light filtering glasses, not the dark red ones that block all the blue light, but just some filtering ones to get less blue light in your eye. And
now you can get transparent ones and they look just like regular glasses.
Yeah, some is better than none, right? Is where I go there. And then the other thing is most of people that experience like they can't physically go outside while they're at work usually work like a 12-hour shift or a 10-hour shift, right? And what I like to do there is on the days that they do go to work, induce a lot of cold in the beginning of the shift and at the end of the shift. So before they go into work, take a cold bath, cold tub. Why? Because that dampens the effect of light. So you get less of a dramatic effect and makes you more insulin sensitive for the first 4 hours after that cold shower or that cold tub. And then if you, at the end of the shift, you do it again so that when you go to bed, you're more insulin sensitive. That cold exposure has been shown significantly to increase insulin sensitivity. So if you can't escape the thing that's causing it, dampen the effect. And this can also be useful for people that just spend an irregular amount of time in front of a screen inside all the time, right?
And I think it's also quite important to add that you don't necessarily need to get cold shower. If you have never done it, just get a cold water on your face to begin with. And
Very cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's actually how I introduce people to the cold exposure thing is let's get your hands and face wet with really cold water, like even with some ice. Put some ice in a bowl, put your hands in there for 3 minutes, and then splash some water on your face for a minute or two. Basically wash your face with really cold ice water, right? And yeah, that's usually enough. 3 minutes of washing your face and getting your hands and face really, really cold is a great introduction. Do that for a week or two, then you can step it up to a cold shower or a little bit more of your body being involved. And then after that, you end up experiencing some pretty significant effects. I've recently had a client that literally messaged me, and she's like, she lives in a desert. So she doesn't have like cold water that's cold enough. This is very important. It needs to be 60 degrees or less in order for your skin to react correctly. So her water's not cold enough. But the air temperature outside in the morning, because it's a high desert, is 55 degrees. So what I have her do is step in the shower, get wet, and then go outside and drink her coffee in the balcony while she drip dries. She's like, I'm freaking shivering, but it's only for like 5 minutes, and then I'm fine after I've dried off. And she's like, after 3 weeks, I legitimately feel better because she had some depression issues and stuff like that, and anxiety issues and things. Immediately started rectifying that in 3 weeks.
And it's beautiful what you just mentioned, because those habits stack up. And just going outside, spending some time with yourself, which people never do. They usually spend time with what is everyone else thinking about me. But when you go outside and you are freezing, all you think about is yourself now. You don't care about everyone else's opinions. So you actually get that like clarity as well in your head.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful way how to just explain that all these little things stack up, and then they end up creating something way more beneficial than you expected out of it. Not just insulin sensitivity, but now you have mental clarity, so many other things.
Yeah. And then another thing that I wanted to touch on, right? So at the end of the day, these are all, I didn't know that she was going to get this dramatic an effect, right? But that's what ended up happening there. So that automatically takes some drugs off the table for her, right? She no longer needs a depression medication. She no longer needs an anxiety medication. Now it's like, oh, okay, I actually feel good. So now we can push things harder in her life, right? She works 2 jobs, etc. And so it's one of those things where now we can push that a little bit harder, and maybe we start enhancing her sleep, or maybe we start enhancing sex hormones in a way that's much more long-term, because the things that I like to focus on are drugs that are basically prescribed by doctors for long-term use, like testosterone and growth hormone. Now growth hormone is prescribed less just because of there's some negative connotations with growth hormone because it can be associated with cancer, like because you're growing everything, right? But go back to our previous episodes, especially the one about cancer itself, right? It's like, okay, well, if your lifestyle is crap, yeah, you probably don't want to introduce growth hormone, for all the reasons we just stated with the insulin resistance thing.
Yeah, and why we're making all this episode about why we're not talking about pushing all this stuff on people,
Yeah, because if you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what you're doing, can you cause some significant issues? Absolutely. Because you're taking growth factors, and growth factors grow everything, right? Any growth promoter is going to exponentially increase your rate of potential cancer, right? And I want to elucidate that just for a moment. Me and you both have cancerous cells right now at this moment. They just haven't turned into a cancerous tumor yet, because our body cleaves them, destroys them through apoptosis and autophagy every evening, every night. That's what should happen. Yeah. But if your lifestyle is shit, like the one that I described earlier, you go to bed really late, you don't get a lot of sleep, you're always got some brain fog going on, that's a clear sign that you're not going through apoptosis and autophagy systems correctly all the time. So those people theoretically have more cancerous cells. They're not quite tumors yet, but if you have more of them, you have a higher risk of some kind of cancerous tumor, right? And then as far as specifically light, right? Like nitric oxide, to be specific, entrains the mitochondria to know whether it's faulty or not. In other words, it's the mechanism. It's one of the mechanisms that lets it know, hey, this mitochondria in this cell is not working as good. We should go through autophagy or apoptosis for this cell. Nitric oxide does that. Where does nitric oxide come? Like people think that you can take pills for nitric. That's not, it has to have a catalyst. There's two catalysts. UVA, right? So UVA light increases nitric oxide production. That happens in the sun for free. What else increases nitric oxide production? Cold. That's why when you get in the cold shower, you come out and your skin is pink. That's nitric oxide. When you go in the sun and your skin gets pink, that's nitric oxide. You see what I'm saying? Both of these are entrainment mechanisms so that your biology works correctly. That's been developed over evolution. That's why I teach people about sun and cold so that they start to understand and hedge against basically cellular mishaps, right? That's where it starts, right? Whether that's at the liver level, right? Or at the kidney level or at the pancreas level, right? Those are the things that are going to start showing up first, right? Because those are working all the time, right? Your heart's working all the time.
Things that we always ask everyone, check if you are healthy. You know, no matter what you are reading about and what you're hearing about and what you have the favorite Instagram influencer telling you to do, it might not be applicable if you are not healthy. You need to be at a point where you literally can say that, hey, if I go this route, it's not going to make me worse. And you never know that if you don't check where you actually are already.
Yeah, and then progress and check your progress, right? 6 months into something like that, or less, right? Especially at the beginning, 3 months in, let's check your blood work again. Let's see if this is working correctly. You should be able to verify a lot of this stuff, especially when you're taking things like testosterone growth hormone, because you can check blood work for those things. Hey, yes, my testosterone is this elevated. Do I really want it that high? Right? Maybe I need to dial back my dose because I see that my red blood cell count is going up. Or maybe, hey, my IGF-1 is nice right at the very top of the level. That's good. I see that all my immune system cells, like my red blood cells, lymphocytes, all of those are perfectly fine. Great. That's a good thing. I can see that my LDH, which is your lactase dehydrogenase, is correct. You can verify things that you're doing with blood work as you start using some of these, if you're needing to use them or if you choose to use them.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, right, if you don't know what you're looking at or how these intertwine, then that's where somebody like me and Juris comes in. You have to be able to look at blood work and really see that. For example, here's a really quick one to see if you're cellularly dehydrated. BUN creatinine ratio, blood urea nitrogen, and your creatinine. Blood urea nitrogen is how much misfolding proteins you're excreting because you're not making a lot of cellular water at the mitochondrial level. It's really that simple. If you don't know that, if what I just told you, you didn't know, you're going to make bad assumptions. You're going to think that you can fix it with just drinking water.
And more often than not, doctors will not even look into those kind of tests because they just look at biggest things. Hey, cholesterol, LDL, this and that. And they're missing out the whole picture because that's because they just are taught like that. These are the things that affect people the most, and look at these. And more often than not, there are little intricacies that we are looking into that can fix all those big issues as well.
Absolutely.
But no, David, I'm mindful of your time. I'm going to let you off because we can talk hours about this topic. And I'll see you in next video.
Awesome.